Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be doing brakes on a 2013 Chevy Cruze. First off, you're going to need a 19mm socket to get the lug nuts off the tire. Before you remove all the lug nuts on the tire, I usually leave one on just in case the tire is stuck to the hub. I leave one on, just loosen it up a little bit, and then go ahead and kick it off or bang it off with a hammer so that it comes loose. Then go ahead and loosen the lug nut and place the tire on the ground. Alright, now that we've got that tire out of our way, we're going to go ahead and look at the brakes and see what size bolts are on the back of the caliper. Looks like 10mm bolts, so we're going to go ahead and get the 3/8 ratchet with a 10mm socket and crack those loose. But first, we're going to go ahead and turn the hub towards us so that we have more access to the bolts on the back of the caliper. With this car, there's two bolts, one on the bottom and one on the top. Okay, so now I'm going to start loosening those bolts up with my ratchet. That hose might be in your way. You really just got to push it up. It's attached to a bracket, and you can just slide it out of your way so that you can loosen up that bolt on the top. I'm just going to crack them loose because they don't feel like they're like rusty, so I shouldn't have a problem just spinning them out with my hand. Now that we've removed the bolts, we're going to go ahead and remove the caliper. Usually you got to wiggle them back and forth to loosen them off. Once it's loose, we can move it off to the other side like I am right now, or you can hang it with a caliper hanger on the strut spring. Now we got to go ahead and remove the bracket bolts. Those are usually bigger, so you should use something with a little bit more leverage. I'm going to be using my 1/2" ratchet with a 18mm socket. Those usually go on pretty tight, so you do need something with more leverage, either a long ratchet or a long wrench. I mean, you can use a 3/8 ratchet, but chances are, if they're on really tight, you could end up breaking your ratchet. That's not something you want to do, so I recommend using a 1/2". Alright, now that we've got those bolts out, we can go ahead and take the bracket off. Now we need to remove the old brake pads and the old hardware. Usually, what I do, if they're frozen on there, I'll beat them off with a hammer. The old hardware, I'll usually pick it off with a flathead screwdriver if it's really stuck. If not, you can usually just pull them out with your hand. Okay, so now once everything is off the bracket, we can go ahead and start cleaning it. We can use a wire brush, a die grinder, a file, anything that can get the rust off of the grooves where the new hardware is going to go, so that our new brake pads can go in nice and smoothly. You don't want to have to force your brake pads in because, they'll get stuck and, they won't be able to slide back and forth when you're using the brakes, and you'll get unevenly worn brake pads, and then your brakes will start pulsating while you're driving, and you're gonna have to do the job all over again. So you want to make sure you get most of the rust off as possible on the brackets, and if your new brake pads slide in smoothly, then you don't have a problem. Alright, so now that I got the bracket all cleaned up, I use the die grinder. Like I said, you don't have to use the die grinder. I just use it because it's a lot faster. We can go ahead and start removing the rotor. The rotor on this car is held in by a Torx 30 screw. It's located right next to the axle nut or underneath the studs. As you can see, it's right there. I'm going to be using my impact with a Torx 30 socket. You can use a screwdriver, a Torx 30 screwdriver if you have one. Uh, Sometimes they'll get really stuck. This one came right off, but sometimes they'll get really stuck and you'll need a special tool to free them up. Once you get that loose, you can just hammer off the rotor. As you can see, just like 2 taps knocked it loose. Alright, so once you get that rotor off, you want to make sure you clean the hub assembly. You can use a wire brush or a die grinder. I'm going to be using my wire brush. You want to make sure you clean up as much of the dirt off as possible and the rust, because we are going to be putting grease on it after, because it is going to be going, the rotor is going to be going over it, so you want to make sure you put grease on anything that touches metal when you're doing brakes. Alright, once you get it all cleaned up, you can start applying the brake grease. Don't just pat some of it on there. You want to make sure you get it all around the hub, because it is going to be sitting behind the rotor. The rotor is going to spin every time you drive, so you want to make sure you get it all over the hub, just so you can avoid like hearing squeaks and stuff like that. Customers don't really like it when just got a brake job and cars like squeaking whenever you use the brakes. Once you got it all over, you can place the new rotor on. You want to make sure that hole lines up with the screw that you took off, just so that it holds it in place. And you're gonna put it back on and tighten it up so it holds the rotor in place. Once you do that, you can grab a can of brake cleaner and start cleaning off the rotor. Now we can start applying grease to the bracket for the new hardware. Like I said, you want to make sure you put grease on anything that touches metal. That's why we're gonna put grease on here for the new hardware. Now we can start placing the new hardware onto the bracket. After we got the hardware on the bracket, we can go ahead and move the rotor towards us to make it easier to place the bracket back into place. I'm gonna go ahead and start putting in the bolts so that it doesn't move. Remember, these are 18mm bolts. I'm gonna be using the electric ratchet. You guys can use the 1/2 inch to tighten it back up. I'm just using this because it's faster. But just as you guys saw me take it off, with this 1/2 inch ratchet, you guys can tighten it back up with that. I'm gonna be using it just to give it that nice little extra torque. Once those are all tight, we can start putting on the brake pads. you want to make sure you get grease on each corner of the brake pad where it's going to slide into the hardware. Once you got the new brake pads on, you want to make sure you grab your tool to push the piston on the brake caliper back so that we can get it to go over the new brake pads on the bracket. If you don't push it back, it won't fit. So you need a tool to push it back. I'm using my brake press tool. It's a dual piston tool, but it works just as well on a single piston. You can use there's also a ratcheting tool that you can use. You can also even use a C-clamp. You can grab one of the old brake pads and put it over the piston to just press it in with a C-clamp. If you don't have that tool, I mean, there's multiple ways you can do it. You don't need to use the tool I'm using. But once you push it back, you want to make sure you put grease on it, just like I did on the piston. Like I said, you want to make sure you put grease on anything touching metal. That piston's going to push up against the brake pads, and I mean, you just want to make sure it doesn't squeak. Once you do that, we want to grab our bolts for the caliper and start threading them on. Remember, these were 10mm bolts. I'm going to use my electric ratchet again just to snug them up on there, and then I'm going to use my regular ratchet just to, tighten it up that extra bit, give it that extra torque. You want to be careful with these, the caliper bolts, because sometimes those can snap if you over tighten them. So you want to be careful, just snug them up. Other than that, guys, that's pretty much it. That's how you do brakes on a 2013 Chevy Cruze. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to see more videos. And I'll see you guys next time.